I don't understand. She was right there. She was sleeping in her bed. Look at her, officer. Why is she looking at me like that? Mark, step away from the girl. Look down at her hands. It's 3:14 a.m. A father stands in the doorway of his 13-year-old daughter's bedroom. Everything looks exactly as it should. The soft pastel paint. The school honors certificates framed on the wall. The rhythmic, peaceful sound of a young girl breathing under a floral duvet. To the rest of the world, Chloe was the ideal child. Quiet, courteous, an honors student who spent her free time isolated in her room, reading or studying on her tablet. But as her father Mark steps closer to tuck her in, his boot clips something heavy beneath the edge of the bed frame. Something metallic, something that doesn't belong in a child's sanctuary. What Mark is about to pull from under that bed won't just destroy his family. It will launch one of the most chilling, psychologically baffling homicide investigations in modern history. Because what lay hidden beneath the floorboards of this suburban home wasn't an erratic, impulsive mistake. It was a meticulously indexed, step-by-step blueprint. A 13-year-old girl hadn't just snapped. She had executed what she believed was the perfect crime. Welcome back to Time with X. If you are drawn to the dark anomalies of human behavior that the world tries desperately to ignore, take a moment to subscribe, because today we are stripping away the veneer of domestic safety to look at a case that defied every known behavioral profiling metric. For nearly 6 months, Chloe lived a double life. While her parents believed she was navigating the normal, awkward phases of early adolescence, she was actually utilizing algorithmic cloaking, mapping out neighborhood surveillance blind spots, and studying forensic countermeasures. She closely examined the operational failures of history's most infamous criminals. She analyzed their downfalls, tracked their sloppy digital trails, and believed she possessed the intellectual superiority to correct their mistakes. And she almost succeeded. Chloe was nearly perfect. The local police were entirely blind. The community was frantically hunting for an external threat, a dangerous transient, a monster hiding in the shadows. They were looking everywhere, except the house next door. But the flaw in a perfectly calculated plan is that it requires absolute, robotic detachment. And when you are 13, the one human variable you can never truly account for is the intuition of your own father. When Mark finally unlocked his daughter's hidden digital drive, a single file materialized on the screen. It wasn't a diary, it was a live countdown timer synced to an active GPS coordinate, accompanied by a 4-word title that turned his blood to ice. But to understand the terrifying scope of what Chloe set in motion, and the exact second her father realized he was sharing a roof with a master manipulator, we have to rewind the clock to 48 hours before the first siren broke the neighborhood silence. The timeline begins on a Tuesday at 4:15 p.m. The autumn air in the quiet cul-de-sac of Whispering Pines is exceptionally still. This is an affluent enclave where crime statistics are practically non-existent. Residents leave their back doors unlocked. Children ride their bicycles until the streetlights flicker to life. It is the last place on earth you would look for a predator. Living directly next door to Mark and his daughter Chloe was 72-year-old Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was a wealthy, fiercely independent widow who had resided in the neighborhood for over 3 decades. To Mark, she was a pleasant, if somewhat reclusive, neighbor. To 13-year-old Chloe, she was something else entirely. She was a subject of intense clinical observation. At exactly 5 p.m. on that Tuesday, Eleanor Vance's security cameras captured her pulling her trash cans to the curb. A mundane, routine action. It was only later, during the forensic review of that footage, that investigators noticed something deeply unsettling in the upper left quadrant of the frame. A second-story window in the adjacent house. The blinds parted by less than 2 inches, and evidence, recovered from inside that room, would confirm that someone had been watching Eleanor's every movement with methodical, documented precision. Inside that room, investigators would later find handwritten notations, precise timestamps logging the elderly woman's daily movements down to the second. The time it took her to walk from her front door to the edge of the asphalt. 24 seconds. It had all been mapped in advance. By Thursday morning, Eleanor Vance had vanished. When her daughter arrived for a scheduled brunch and found the front door ajar, the house cold, and Eleanor's purse sitting untouched on the kitchen island, panic tore through the community. Within hours, the property was crawling with forensic investigators. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no obvious signs of a violent struggle in the main living areas. But when detectives stepped into the master bedroom, the narrative shifted from a missing persons case to something infinitely more sinister. The mattress was stripped. A dark, localized saturation pattern was discovered on the underlying foam, a pattern that presumptive chemical testing confirmed was human blood. Someone had tried to clean the room using high-grade industrial luminol neutralizing agents, but they had left behind a singular, critical error. A faint, partial footprint tracked in chemical residue leading toward the back exit. The size of the print? A men's size 10. Detectives immediately zeroed in on a prime suspect. His name was Vance, Eleanor's 24-year-old estranged grandson from a previous marriage. Daryl was an eccentric, deeply troubled local handyman who lived in a trailer park less than 3 miles away. He had a documented history of financial instability, petty theft, and violent, erratic outbursts. More importantly, neighbors reported seeing Daryl's battered, rusted pickup truck idling near the cul-de-sac at an unusual hour on the night of the disappearance. When investigators executed a search warrant at Daryl's residence, they hit what appeared to be an absolute goldmine of incriminating evidence. Buried in the bottom of his plastic trash receptacle outside were a pair of muddy, blood-stained work boots. The tread matched the partial print found in Eleanor's bedroom perfectly. When pinned to the wall of an interrogation room, Daryl completely fell apart. He wept. He shook. He hyperventilated. Daryl Vance. I swear to you, I didn't touch her. I don't know whose blood that is. Someone is setting me up. You have to believe me. He admitted he had been in the neighborhood to beg his grandmother for money, but he swore on his life that when he knocked on her door, nobody answered. He claimed he found the boots in the back of his truck bed, placed there by an unknown individual. To the seasoned homicide detectives, Daryl's defensive performance was textbook. It was the desperate, pathetic flailing of an impulsive family black sheep caught red-handed. The case seemed entirely open and shut. The digital footprint, the physical evidence, and the behavioral profile all pointed to an aggressive murder by a desperate relative. The community breathed a collective sigh of relief. The monster had been identified. The danger had been neutralized. But as Daryl Vance was being processed into the county jail, 30 miles away in a state forensics lab, a technician was running a microscopic analysis on the blood found on Daryl's boots. And what the data revealed would completely shatter the state's entire theory of the crime. The blood didn't belong to the victim, Eleanor Vance, and it didn't belong to Daryl. It belonged to an unidentified, completely unrelated third party. Leave a comment below right now. Do you think the police were negligent for stopping their search with Daryl, or did they fall victim to an intentional, highly sophisticated misdirection layout? Let me know your thoughts, because what we are about to uncover next changes the entire geography of this case. While investigators were busy congratulating themselves, the true evidence trail remained undisturbed. But a single, incidental interaction between a low-ranking patrol officer and a domestic pet was about to blow the entire illusion wide open. It was Friday evening, roughly 36 hours after Eleanor Vance had been reported missing. Officer James Miller was conducting a routine, low-priority canvass of the immediate adjoining properties. He wasn't looking for a killer. He believed the killer was already behind bars. He was simply collecting supplemental statements to wrap up the formal case file for the district attorney. Officer Miller walked up the concrete steps of Mark's home and rang the doorbell. Mark answered within seconds, looking exhausted but entirely cooperative. He invited the officer into the foyer, expressing the same neighborly concern that everyone in Whispering Pines had felt over the past 2 days. Mark: "It's just devastating, officer. We've lived next to Eleanor for years. My daughter Chloe is completely shaken up by this. It's hard to explain to a child that this kind of evil can exist so close to home." As Mark spoke, Officer Miller noted nothing unusual. Mark was acting precisely how a protective, civic-minded father should act. But as the officer stood in the entryway, writing notes on his clipboard, a minor, seemingly irrelevant pattern interrupt occurred. The exact kind of random, real-world variable that no criminal mastermind, no matter how intelligent, can ever truly predict. Chloe's black indoor cat suddenly darted from the living room into the hallway. The animal wasn't walking. It was in a state of sheer, hyper-vigilant terror. It cornered itself against the baseboard. Its fur completely stood on end. Its eyes locked onto the ceiling ventilation grate. It hissed violently at nothing at all. Mark laughed nervously, reaching down to soothe the animal. "Sorry about that. He's been acting strange all morning. I think the sirens over the last 2 days have him completely on edge." But Officer Miller was an experienced tracker who spent his weekends hunting in the dense woodlands of the state. He knew animal behavior. The cat wasn't reacting to an abstract auditory stimulus like a siren. It was reacting to a highly specific scent or structural anomaly directly above them. Before Miller could process this observation, 13-year-old Chloe stepped out from the shadows of the kitchen. She didn't look like a terrified child. She looked remarkably composed. Her hair was perfectly brushed, her school uniform uncreased. She looked directly into Officer Miller's eyes with a level of intense, unblinking focus that made the veteran cop feel immediately uncomfortable. "Chloe." "Good evening, officer. If you are verifying the timeline for Thursday evening, I can assist you. My father was at the hardware store from 6:45 p.m. until 7:30 p.m. I remained inside this house, specifically in my bedroom, completing my advanced placement biology curriculum. I logged off my educational server at precisely 9:12 p.m., brushed my teeth, and slept. I did not observe any vehicular or pedestrian traffic next door." Officer Miller froze for a fraction of a second. The alibi was flawless. In fact, it was too flawless. When you interview a typical 13-year-old child about a traumatic event in their neighborhood, they speak in fragmented sentences, emotional outbursts, and ambiguous time frames. They say things like, "I think it was around dinner time," or "I was playing video games when I heard a noise." Chloe didn't do that. She spoke with the cold, calibrated linguistic precision of a legal professional or a military analyst. She quoted exact minute-by-minute timestamps without a single stutter, a single hesitation, or a single trace of grief for the elderly woman she had known her entire life. Miller downplayed his suspicion, thanked the family for their cooperation, and stepped back out into the cold night air. But as he walked down the driveway, he couldn't shake the eerie sensation that he had just been read a rehearsed script. He shined his tactical flashlight along the narrow property line separating Mark's house from Eleanor's estate. The beam of light cut through the damp grass, illuminating a row of dense hydrangea bushes. Something caught his eye near the base of the soil. He knelt down, parting the branches. There, pressed deep into the muddy earth, directly beneath the crawlspace access hatch of Mark's own home, was a single, tiny physical object. It was a pearl earring, a vintage, custom-designed pearl earring that exactly matched the description of the jewelry Eleanor Vance was wearing on the day she vanished. Officer Miller felt a cold sweat break across his neck. The physical evidence wasn't leading away from the cul-de-sac. It was pointing directly toward the foundation of the very house he had just exited. He didn't call for backup yet. He didn't want to alert the family. Instead, he returned to his cruiser, pulled up the digital network registry for the Whispering Pines sector, and requested a priority forensic sweep of the local IP addresses routing through Mark's domestic modem. What the cyber forensics unit found within 45 minutes would completely turn this investigation into an absolute psychological horror show. Someone inside that house hadn't just been browsing the internet. They had been actively hijacking their neighbors' secure Wi-Fi networks to access encrypted marketplaces. But as the police began quietly setting up a perimeter around the home, Mark was about to make his own horrifying discovery inside his daughter's bedroom. A discovery that would force him into an impossible choice between his paternal instinct and the survival of an innocent man. It is now 1 a.m. on Saturday morning. Mark couldn't sleep. The interaction with Officer Miller hours earlier had left an oily, uncomfortable residue in his mind. He kept replaying his daughter's words over and over again in his head. "I logged off my educational server at precisely 9:12 p.m. Why did she say it like that? Why did she sound like she was giving a deposition? Mark silently walked down the carpeted hallway toward Chloe's room. He just wanted to see her. He wanted to look at her sleeping face and reassure himself that she was just a normal, innocent little girl who was stressed by a local tragedy. He gently pushed the door open. The room was bathed in the pale blue glow of her tablet screen. Chloe wasn't sleeping. She was sitting upright in bed, her face entirely blank, her fingers flying across the glass interface with terrifying speed. The moment she saw her father in the doorway, her demeanor transformed instantly. In a fraction of a second, she slid the tablet beneath her pillow, smiled warmly, and spoke in the soft, sweet voice of a child. "Daddy? What's wrong? Did you have a bad dream?" Mark felt a sudden, inexplicable knot form in his stomach. "Chloe, why are you awake? It's past 1 in the morning. Give me the tablet, please." Chloe hesitated. For the first time in her life, a micro-expression of absolute, icy calculation flashed across her eyes. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a look of innocent compliance. "Okay, Daddy, I was just reading." She handed him the device. Mark took it, kissed her forehead, and told her to get some rest. He walked back to his master bedroom, closed the door, and sat down at his desk. He felt dirty, like he was violating his daughter's privacy. But the instinct of a parent is an incredibly powerful evolutionary tool. It tells you when something is fundamentally broken in your environment. He bypassed the simple 4-digit lock screen. He had set it up for her years ago using her birth date. When the interface opened, there were no standard social media apps, no games, no teenage group chats. The home screen was completely barren, save for a single, heavily encrypted Vault application disguised as a standard calculator utility. Mark's heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He used a master recovery password that he maintained for all household devices. The Vault opened. Mark's heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He used a master recovery password that he maintained for all household devices. The Vault opened. What materialized on that screen did not belong to a child. It belonged to an engineered intelligence. What forensic analysts would later document from that device was among the most methodical evidence packages they had ever recovered from a residential search. Dozens of neatly cataloged video files, all sourced from the neighboring property's security cameras. The footage had been studied with such precision that investigators identified a 6-foot corridor of camera dead space, a gap that, according to the forensic report, would have allowed someone to move between the two properties and enter Eleanor's master bedroom window without ever appearing on a single digital recording. But it was the text file at the bottom of the directory that completely paralyzed him. The file was titled Countermeasures and Redirection Protocols. With a shaking finger, Mark scrolled through pages of typewritten text. The lead forensic analyst who later reviewed the file would testify that, in her entire career, she had never encountered a document of its kind recovered from a residential device. It described, in structured and methodical terms, a comprehensive strategy for evading detection. It addressed investigative profiling, the engineering of false physical evidence, and the deliberate framing of a pre-selected third party. Every element of what had been done to Daryl Vance was in there, planned, documented, filed. Mark couldn't breathe. His vision began to blur. His 13-year-old daughter hadn't just stumbled into something dark. She had planned the entire disappearance of Eleanor Vance. She had deliberately stolen Daryl's boots from his truck, covered them in synthetic forensic matter, and used them to frame an innocent, broken young man. Detective: Mark, did you notice any behavioral changes in your daughter during this period? No, she was perfect. She was always so perfect. Suddenly, the silence of the house was shattered by a deafening, aggressive barrage of pounding on the front door. Voice outside: "Police, open the door immediately. We have a signed search warrant for this property." Mark stood up, his mind completely fracturing. In his left hand, he held the absolute proof that his daughter was a calculated predator. Outside his door stood the full force of the law, ready to tear his life apart. This is the exact moment where the psychological friction of this story peaks. If you believe Mark should have destroyed the tablet right then and there to protect his flesh and blood, hit the like button. If you believe his duty was to open that door and hand over his child to the authorities, drop a comment with your reasoning below. This is Time with X, and we are about to enter the most high-stakes segment of this entire narrative. Mark ran down the stairs, but before he could reach the deadbolt, the front door was kicked off its hinges. Flashbangs didn't detonate, but tactical officers flooded the hallway with rifles raised, pinning Mark to the floor. Through the chaos, Mark looked up toward the top of the stairs. What the first officer through the door reported seeing at the top of the staircase that night would become the single detail that no member of that tactical team could ever fully set aside. It was included in the official incident report in 2 sentences. It has never been publicly released in full. What investigators found on that tablet, and what they encountered inside that house in the early hours of Saturday morning, would take the case entirely out of the realm of anything the Whispering Pines task force had been trained to handle. By 4 a.m., the police department's specialized interrogation wing was fully operational. The strategy deployed by the Major Crimes Unit was highly tactical. They recognized they were dealing with an unprecedented behavioral anomaly. They isolated the father and daughter, assigning 2 entirely different styles of interrogator to each room to test for structural inconsistencies in their narratives. In Room A, lead detective Robert Vance, who was distantly related to the victim, handled Mark. Detective Vance used the friction hammer method. He slammed crime scene photos onto the table, yelled, and used intense, aggressive positioning to break Mark's psychological composure. Detective Vance: "Look at these photos, Mark. That's a 72-year-old woman's blood. We found her pearl earring buried under your crawl space. We found the digital routing logs tracking back to your exact IP address. Your life is over, Mark, unless you tell me right now where you hid her body." Mark was weeping openly, his head buried in his hands. He wasn't acting. He was a father experiencing the absolute, total annihilation of his reality. "Mark, I don't know where she is. I swear to God, I don't know. I just found her tablet tonight. You don't understand. It wasn't me. Oh God, it wasn't me." Meanwhile, in Room B across the hallway, Detective Sarah Lynn took a completely opposite approach with 13-year-old Chloe. Detective Lynn removed her tactical vest, sat down across from the young girl, and spoke in a soft, maternal, completely non-threatening tone. She offered her a cup of water and a warm blanket. Detective Lynn: "Chloe, it's okay, honey. I know this is really scary. There are a lot of loud men with guns out there, but you aren't in any trouble. We just want to understand what happened. Your dad is in the other room, and he's saying some really confusing things. He's saying that you wrote some things on your tablet. Can you help me understand why he would say that?" Chloe looked at the cup of water, then looked up at Detective Lynn. Her eyes were completely clear. There were no tears, no redness, no typical signs of juvenile distress. "Chloe, Detective Lynn, you are utilizing the Reid technique, specifically Phase 4, theme development. You are attempting to offer me a moral excuse for a perceived deviation so that I will establish judicial compliance. It's an effective strategy for low cognitive subjects, but it is entirely ineffective here." Detective Lynn froze. The air in Room B became instantly sub-zero. Lynn had spent 15 years interviewing gang members, cartel enforcers, and serial predators. She had never, not once, heard a 13-year-old child identify a psychological interrogation framework by name, let alone evaluate its effectiveness with such casual disdain. Detective Lynn: "Chloe, what did you say?" "Chloe, my father had no knowledge of any of this. He is not a suspect. What investigators have recovered from that device belongs entirely to a case that goes considerably further back and considerably further geographically than this neighborhood. That is all I will say without legal representation present." Behind the double-sided mirror in the observation room, the chief of police and the district attorney stood in complete, horrified silence. They weren't looking at a child who had been traumatized or manipulated. They were looking at a completely developed, cold-blooded, psychological anomaly. Detective Lynn leaned forward, her voice dropping all pretense of warmth. "Chloe, where is Eleanor Vance?" Chloe smiled. It was a tiny, polite, chilling gesture. "If you check the GPS coordinates listed in the file my father currently holds on his screen, you will find an automated countdown. That countdown is not a timer for her survival. It is a release protocol for a digital archive. If I do not enter a verified counter passphrase within the next 26 minutes, a series of pre-scheduled emails will be transmitted to every major media outlet in the state." Detective Lynn: "Emails containing what?" Chloe: "The exact locations of 3 separate, unsolved missing persons cases from the adjoining counties over the past 24 months. Cases that your department closed due to a lack of physical evidence." The room went entirely silent. The implications of her statement were so massive that Detective Lynn felt her physical balance shift. Chloe wasn't just a suspect in a single neighborhood disappearance. She was the key to unlocking a multi-year, multi-jurisdictional chain of unsolved cases. Cases that had gone cold under the full watch of the state law enforcement apparatus. But did she actually know what she was claiming to know? Or was this the ultimate, desperate bluff of a highly narcissistic child trying to secure total control over the room? The clock was ticking. 25 minutes remained before the digital archive would deploy, and the police were about to find out that the final piece of the puzzle wasn't hidden in a field, a forest, or a lake. It was buried in the one place they never thought to check. 3 cold cases, a 26-minute countdown, and Eleanor Vance has been somewhere within reach this entire time. Where do you think she is? Drop your theory below, and subscribe so you don't miss part 6. This is Time with X. The realization didn't hit like a lightning bolt, it crept up like a terminal illness. The local police station wasn't just a municipal building, it was an older, converted historical property that sat directly adjacent to the municipal city works yard, a yard where Chloe's school group had taken a civic field trip less than 3 weeks prior. She didn't move the body to a distant highway site. She had used an old, decommissioned underground heating utility tunnel that ran directly from the crawl space of her own home, underneath the suburban tree line, and terminated directly inside the concrete crawl vault, beneath the very interrogation wing where she was currently sitting. Eleanor Vance wasn't miles away. She was less than 6 feet beneath the metal chair where Detective Lynn was conducting the interview. Chloe had used the police's own structural infrastructure as the tomb for her crime, knowing that the dense concrete and industrial insulation of the station would mask any forensic signature from dogs or heat sensors. She had brought the evidence to the one place on Earth the police would never think to search, their own home turf. Because of her age, Chloe could not be tried as an adult under existing state statutes. She was remanded to a high-security juvenile forensic psychiatric facility, classified as an unprecedented behavioral anomaly. To this day, she resides behind reinforced glass, completing her advanced education under strict military-grade digital monitoring. She has never expressed a single word of remorse, a single shred of guilt, or a single tear. For Eleanor Vance, Daryl, or her father, Mark sold the house in Whispering Pines for a fraction of its value, completely broken by the realization that the child he had tucked into bed every night was a fully realized sociopathic mastermind. He lives in complete anonymity, haunted by the memory of that 3:14 a.m. walk down the hallway. This case forces us to confront a terrifying evolutionary reality that sometimes the greatest threats to our survival aren't born in the wild criminal underworld. Sometimes they are nurtured right inside our own homes, eating dinner at our tables, sleeping under floral duvets. But while the story of Chloe concludes within the stone walls of a state asylum, our exploration is far from over. Our next case unfolds somewhere danger is never supposed to reach, inside a sterile, high-security neonatal unit of a prestigious metropolitan hospital. For over 14 months, an elite pediatric unit experienced an inexplicable, statistically impossible spike in infant mortality rates. The doctors blamed genetic anomalies, the administrators blamed equipment failures. But when a young night shift nurse noticed a series of handwritten chemical equations left on a dry erase board, she realized that someone with a medical degree wasn't trying to save lives. They were treating the ward as a private laboratory, and the next patient on the schedule was the chief of surgery's own newborn son. Click the video appearing on your screen right now to step inside the terrifying corridor of the clinical angel of death. Let's see if you can solve the diagnostic riddle before the next alarm sounds on Time with X.